Good afternoon. Welcome to the latest Straight Up Hangout. Straight Up Hangouts are a weekly event presented by Barrel Strength Design and Pixel and Tonic. I'm Ben Friesick from Barrel Strength Design, and today we have Brad Bell with us from Pixel and Tonic. Others here include Andrew Welch from NY Studio 107, freelancer Marianne Newlavant, Matt Stein from Working Concept, and Steve Adams from Pixel Jitsu. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and stepping away from your email for a few minutes. Today we're going to use the troubleshooting email errors document that is posted on the Craft CMS website as a bit of a template to explore email and how to fix it when we run into problems with it. I think most of us have tried to send an email through Craft or some other service at some point, and it hasn't gone smoothly. And there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle involved, so it's not always obvious where to look, and we hope to talk through that a bit and help clarify what's going on there. So, with that said, I'm going to frame things, and then we can start talking here. The two when emails tend to go wrong, there's two things that two areas they tend to go wrong. In one, they just don't send at all. We hit send in Craft, or a user does something and it just doesn't send and never gets sent. And the other is it gets sent, but it never gets delivered. So the email gets out there in the wild, but it never makes it to somebody's inbox. Shall we start there? I guess, how about I share my screen and start with the email settings. All right, here we are in Craft, and when we set up Craft, we set up our email. The email has a few settings: your system email address, your from name, if you're using a template, and then the protocol information, where you're sending your email through. By default, I believe this is set to PHP Mail, and another common one on servers is Send Mail, that they kind of require no configuration and they don't work very well. Or they require configuration by other people that manage your servers maybe, and then frequently they're implemented not very well. How many folks here use PHP Mail or Send Mail when sending, or do we recommend that at all?
I tell people to only use it for testing, for development purposes. I would never use those in production at all.
Why?
Why? Because their email delivery reliability is terrible. Specifically because they're not configured properly, and there's just a very good chance that sending an email programmatically through code is not going to reach its intended recipient with them.
Yeah, and also the server block it might be coming from could be blacklisted for any number of reasons too.
Right.
Yeah.
I think another thing we run into is often people's local configurations, they are just not set up properly, depending on how they're doing, and if they're using PHP or SendMail, if you're doing that locally, it could just not be set up in your local environment, and then you get to become the email server guru figuring out what's wrong with your email.
Having set up many postfix and SendMail installations and everything, it's not all that fun.
So this kind of begins on I think these two settings kind of begin on the topic, is your mail being sent at all properly? And so one of the next recommendations is, well, upgrade to use something that's better at sending email. Maybe the next easiest one is Gmail. You add your username and login, and then you're sending email nicely through Gmail's service. Does anybody use this setting?
Not usually.
Yeah, I will. I have apps for business though, so I get the SMTP.
Yeah, yeah. So underneath, that's just using SMTP with a couple of predefined like presets. You know, smtp.gmail.com and the right ports and TLS and all that. The only issue, the main issue we see when using that is Google kind of considers SMTP an unsecure method of sending email, and so there's some setting that under your Google account settings that I don't know how they roll it out, but every now and then they check this box that says, or they uncheck this box that says like allow
unsecure logins.
Allow unsecure logins, something like that. And so if you have that unchecked in your Google account settings, then Craft will not be able to connect via the SMTP settings. You have to go through and allow insecure logins.
Interesting. Yeah, so one of the maybe nice things about Gmail is when you use Gmail to send, it actually appears in your sent email of the Gmail account you're connected with. So that's one thing to note. And then another thing to note is, I believe this was the case at one point, I'm not sure if it's still the case, but these settings get saved in plain text in your database. So if you have your personal Gmail account as your protocol and then you send a message to support and send over your database to support, you're probably sharing your password, whether anybody cares or not, or looks at it or not is secondary, but just to know that might be the case. All right. Can you confirm or deny that, Brad? I don't.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the question?
Does Gmail store password settings in plain text in the database?
Yes, and as well as SMTP. Yes.
Okay. And this is just, I mean, the alternative, right, is to hash it, which if anybody has access to the database, they can unhash it probably as well. So,
yeah, I mean, there's I think 2 feature requests on the feedback side. One is to start encrypting, and because hash is one way, so encrypting and decrypting that stuff in the database, which and the same for like S3 asset source settings, and so we could do that. I think the better solution probably is just to make all of that stuff multi-environment aware, so it can be configured through the config file system settings and stuff.
Yeah, add email.php or something.
Yeah.
Just
kind of move it out of the database, but
that'd give a little more flexibility between environments too.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Pop, has anybody ever used this one recently?
Not in about a decade.
Yeah.
Does anybody use this, Brad?
No, honestly, I don't think I've ever seen an install with it. The only reason it's there is because the underlying mail library we use, which is called PHP Mailer, not to be confused with PHP Mail, has support for it. So we just figure to throw it in. And that's changed for Craft 3. We're swapping over to Swift Mailer, which is
good choice.
More, yeah.
All right, then our final setting then is, I saved this one for last because it's the one you probably want to be using, SMTP. Like Brad said, Gmail's already using it under the hood in the settings, and these are the ones that help you connect to proper email sending. I don't know what you call them, email service provider, email sending. I always get stumbling on what they call them.
What? Simple mail transfer protocol? Is that what you're asking?
No, just what do you call Mailgun and SendGrid and?
Oh, I just call them like transactional email providers.
Transactional email providers that
I call them spam hoses, but I guess that's probably not very nice.
So
don't tell them that.
No, I use them all the time, so no.
So these services are great because they get away from the the default PHP Mail type ones, and they have an infrastructure that's really well optimized for sending email, and they start giving you more tracking as to what might have happened. So if you get past that stage 1 of troubleshooting of yes, my email was sent, you get to that stage 2 of will it ever get delivered, and when you're using PHP Mail, you don't really have a chance to know that. It's just if your client asks you that question, you have to say, I do not know. Like, literally, I do not know. And with these, you can start to get a little more insight into what might have happened. You'll be able to see if it was received at least by the service, and then if the service sent it, or if it might have been bounced back to the service, or various other information that could relate to the life of that email.
Yeah, I mean, the only downside is you can't feign innocence and say, well, I sent the email, you didn't get it. You know? But yeah, another service worth noting, I think, is Amazon SES, Simple Email Service, which is what I typically set clients up for. It's free, and if you set up the DKIM records and a couple of other things, you also become a verified sender, which is kind of nice because it makes it a little less likely that the email is going to end up in someone's spam folder. That's another benefit of using not just Amazon SES, but some of these services, is that your mail is more likely to actually get delivered.
Yeah. So there's a great. I linked to it in the Slack group. I have no idea how to link to it in the Hangout. But Coding Horror has a great blog post that's called "So You'd Like to Send Some Email Through Code," and it talks about all the things that you need to do to make sure your emails reliably deliver, like setting up reverse DNS pointer records, configure domain keys, and get set up sender ID records and SPF records, and it's all like there's a lot of things you need to do in order to ensure your email gets delivered, and that's what all of these places like Mandrill and Mailgun, like, they've all taken care of this for you, so you don't have to worry about it. So it's another great benefit of them.
Yeah, because spam was a huge problem, and for some time it still continues to be, but it's getting a little bit better. But a lot of these services are kind of akin to getting a server certificate to do HTTPS, in that they are a verified sender, so your email is going to be more trusted, and they take care of all of those little fiddly config things that Brad was talking about.
So I think the article that we'll link to it in the show notes, but the article that Brad linked to has a great quote about email. It says, "Email is a well that has been truly and thoroughly poisoned. The digital equivalent of a Superfund cleanup site. The ecosystem around email is a dank miasma of half-implemented, incompletely supported anti-spam hacks and workarounds."
I think they're being generous.
Yeah, that's too polite.
Yeah.
And so to speak to, so these services help you set up a few policies that have been created to help against this. The two most common you'll see are SPF, Sender Policy Framework, and DKIM, Domain Keys Identified Email. These services don't set them. I think these services don't set them up for you immediately, but they really facilitate the process of you knowing what you need to do do it and helping test to ensure that it's in place.
Well, yeah, like Amazon SES, they won't let you send email until you set up the DKIM records, for instance.
And let's give both of these, I know these are mouthfuls of acronyms, but to try to demystify these things and what they're doing in the context of spam, Sender Policy Framework identifies which mail servers are permitted to send your email. So Sender Policy Framework is kind of like saying, hey, if we're sending email from straightupcraft.com, we approve these locations to be sending email from straightupcraft.com. If we might approve MailChimp or Campaign Monitor to be sending it, we might approve ourselves. We don't approve somebody else. So if somebody else tries to send, there's a flag in the system about it. Domain keys, and this one's a little, I'll do my best and somebody can correct me. This helps prevent forged emails from senders and receivers. So, and I believe it takes your listed domain, you set it up, and when you send an email from your domain, it stores a public key, on your listed domain, and then when somebody receives an email from that domain, the receiving program will reach back out to your domain and confirm that the key is the one it expects it to be, and that everything checks out.
Yeah, and that public key is actually added to your DNS records. And that's what the DKIM record is.
Oh, it is. It is the text record. You're the one that puts it in your text as a text record.
Yep.
And I don't know if anybody uses this, but Postmark has a free tool that's the DMARC Digest, and every week it'll send you an email. So it tracks hits to your SPF and DKIM records, and it'll show you the emails that went out that week, whether they go through Postmark or not, and it'll actually show you what align with your policies and what doesn't. So you can actually see the IP addresses of and host names of servers that are sending mail on behalf of your domain but aren't aligning with your rules, and it's actually a really great tool. I get to look at it every week and get upset about at least like 30 IP addresses. So it's, but you can also ratchet down like how strict you want your rules to be. So whether
does this help you do anything about it, or does it just get you upset every week?
Both. So it'll because you can set like in your policy you can tell authenticating mail servers how strict you want them to be with the SPF and DKIM records.
And maybe blacklist people, right?
Right. Well, you can say, hey, if this doesn't align, definitely reject it, or if it doesn't align, accept it, but be curious. And this way you can actually see what's happening and keep track on it. So if you want to ratchet down your settings, and you can basically make sure that the legitimate sources are all covered and checking out. It's pretty cool. But it's Postmark's just like weekly check, and it sends you a digest. If anybody else is using it, but it's pretty cool.
That sounds cool. All right, so these are things that we consider when we are in this category of is our email being delivered, or how are we making our email more deliverable? Are there any other items in this category? If your email is not being delivered, you can check your junk or your spam folders. It might not be making it because it is making it, but something's filtering it out and placing it somewhere else.
You could be blacklisted.
You could
Yeah,
be
and
blacklisted.
using some of these sending tools will help avoid that. I've definitely had many sites that I've set up that they're blacklisted, just because they happen to be in a server block at some VPS farm that other people were doing bad stuff in.
Yeah.
And the only way to fix that is to, go through one of these sending services as a verified sender.
I believe, I'm a little hazy on the status of this, but I believe a lot of these spam prevention methods initially tried to say, hey, if you're sending from this IP, we're identifying this IP as bad, and we're going to try to stop spam from that IP. And some of these newer protocols are actually trying to say, no, you register your domain as something that we're going to start judging for whether it's credible or not. So I believe DKIM starts moving into that domain range. So when you're building your email reputation and building up your list and your volume, it's your domain that is getting the reputation. And if you switch IP addresses or use a different service, that's not going to hurt your reputation. You're not going to have to rebuild from that. You're actually building credibility you can take with you if you change the underlying infrastructure.
And it's great that they are trying to solve this problem, but it is really kind of sticky because the way SMTP works is that there's a chain. Your email will get passed through a number of different servers before it tries to get to the destination. And if any of those in the loop, especially the one on the receiving end, doesn't happen to be doing that, then you're not going to benefit from it. So it's one of those things that it's just going to take a long time to sort out.
Yeah. So use text messages.
WhatsApp.
Just kidding. All right. So then let's take a step back now. We've got our email, we've got our domain set up. we're doing good things for deliverability. There's a pretty low chance it's not going to be delivered because we're a respectable internet citizen in good standing, and we use good email practices. What could go wrong on the craft side of things, or I want to be careful in saying the craft side of things, because we have the plugin Sprout Email and Sprout Forms, which also kicks out notifications, and we get a lot of support tickets around email, and almost all of the time it's not craft and it's not our plugins, it's something else in the ecosystem that wasn't configured. Not to say there's not a bug now and then that needs to get sorted out from the platform, but I feel that as a web developer or designer, you're working on the site, your world is the site, and something goes wrong and you're like, it's got to be the site. But in the world of email, it's frequently not the site. So let's jump back to the craft side of things and start asking that question. We try to send something from craft. What do we start to do when we want to troubleshoot what might be going wrong if it doesn't get sent?
Well, the first thing you want to do is, you're entering your settings for SMTP or whatever, and then there's a test email button at the bottom of the page you're on. And so you click that, and an email is going to get sent up to the system email address. And if you get a red flash across the top of the screen, something's went wrong, and then you need to look in your craft log files.
So here I'm going to resave my settings and mess up the host name here. And if I come back down here and hit test now, I don't get the nice blue positive message. I get the angry error message. And
then I will reiterate what you said. When something goes wrong with email, there's a 99.9% chance it has nothing to do with craft.
Yeah, and I'm going to reiterate, Brad reiterating what you reiterated. No, but I mean, anytime, if you make software that sends email, whether it's Craft or Sprout Email, I mean, you're essentially going into the server support business, because a majority of the tickets that you're going to get just have to do with broken or incomplete or improperly set up configurations. So if you're looking at this podcast and something is going wrong with your email, 95% of the time, maybe even more, it's going to be something wrong with your setup. So before you send that ticket to poor Brad or Ben, take a look at your server setup for sure.
And I think a good question to start with, just to yourself, is there's thousands of people using this software right now. Yeah. There's thousands of websites kicking out emails on a regular basis. Am I really doing something unique enough that I've probably discovered something that nobody else has discovered, or is it probably a mistake I made? So I wanted to just give a quick demo of, we got an error the last time we tried. We pulled up our craft log file. These are intimidating files. The trick to know is do a find and start with a open bracket and type the word error, and that's the string that you're looking for most of the time when you're searching for errors in your log. And right away we find there's a PHP mailer exception, SMTP connect failed.
Hey Ben, do me a favor. Go to the server info in the and go to the. Well, you can leave the page.
I'll pop it up.
Go to the logs.
Oops.
Are we seeing it in here?
Yeah, it should show up there too.
Okay, great.
I've just, and I've grepped through many a log file, but I found that sometimes the way that it's presented here on the back end sometimes makes it even easier to find. Because it is kind of sectioned out.
Brad, on the spot feature requests. Mm-hmm. I think it'd be helpful to filter this by errors. I think a lot of the time people are coming here, they're looking specifically for errors, and often it's.
This whole control panel log viewing thing, that was we never even really meant for people to use that. That was our own little secret We're
Bad.
Security
debugging
through
sites.
obscurity.
Like, we're debugging sites and we don't have file
So-
system access for whatever reason. So I'm like, we'll just put this thing in here.
So
But
it was
then-
helpful to you, but you didn't want it to be helpful to others.
So
Right.
Brad, if you threw a data table in there, you automatically get the ability to just type and it will dynamically filter and sort, and you can do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's a feature request site for that.
It would
I
be
mean,
even nice
literally-
when you gave somebody the error, you could link right to this page in the control panel with dev mode was on, and then they'd get all the information.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the only reason I wanted you to go here and look at this is, for people who are not all that comfortable with the command line and all that kind of stuff, you can go here and then just hit Command F or whatever to search on error and see it here.
Yeah, the only thing to be aware of, I guess, and usually it's not an issue unless you have dev mode enabled, is that the act of loading that page also generates logs.
Yeah.
And so, like, sometimes when you want to catch the error at the top, it's better to look at the file system.
Yeah. So and that's kind of I think we've looked at this before. Other ways, if you're not sure where an error is, you can delete all your logs.
Yeah.
And then when something happens, you'll regenerate it. And also, I've already opened this log page, so if I scroll to the top now or whatever, and go back and fail my message again, over here I've got one log, so there's a lot less to sift through if I'm trying to figure out what might have happened. And on this page, I no longer have to. Or does this generate new requests?
Yeah, no, that's just reading the logs from the file system.
Yeah, so this, I've refreshed now, and now it's right at the top because I don't know what I'm saying. I did reload the page, so. But it's at the top. I don't know how to say that.
But yes, I mean, it would be cool if you could show just warnings or errors or whatever in there. But it sounds like Brad is mad that we found out about this little feature.
No. Now I just have to, we just have to make it better now.
I want it color coded.
It's very helpful for us troubleshooting with users as well, with plugins or whatever. We can say go here and look, depending on the skill level of who we're talking to. It's easier to say one thing or another.
Ooh, you could have it filter by plugin too.
Oh, it actually will. Well, if a plugin is using its own log file, we can do that.
Yeah. All right. Back to emails.
Right.
We'll. I'm sorry, I should have said that when I had something to say.
Sorry. Sorry.
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
How much of this has to do with like the email server and the web server actually being separate entities now? Like I've quit using, the VPS hosting with Open Relays and all that kind of stuff. So, how many of your clients actually have their email server on the same server as the web server?
0 for us.
0, right.
I have a couple, but yeah, you're right. It's not that common.
Yeah.
No, I think that the complications are just kind of a combination of the spam problem and how horrendous that was, and then all the countermeasures, and the whole way of doing things has gotten a little bit more complicated as a result of that. I mean, it's just people doing bad things, screwing it up for everybody else is really what has kind of got us to the point where email is a hairy, nasty beast.
All right. So here, to look back at our last error here, we got an error, SMT connect failed. Craft has a pretty helpful doc that walks us through what we're talking about here, or walks us through several of these things and what might happen. And if there was an error is one of the conditions that might happen. It talks about where we might find it in the logs, and then it gives us several common errors and what they might mean. So SMT connect failed is one of those here. The protocol was set to something that it couldn't connect with. So this is a good place to start, and from my experience, most of the issues that we've run into are on this list. One item that I've noted with SMT connect failed, it can also mean that sometimes So some services, one I'm thinking about in particular is not coming to mind. What was the one that replaced Mandrill or made a big marketing campaign about that? Spark Post.
Oh.
Spark Post. They're a solid service, but they actually have pretty good practices when it comes to setting up your email in the system, so that which is great for deliverability purposes. You're making sure that the email checks out and it's owned by who it's owned by and so on. But they're very strict in that, so that if you happen to be sending with the wrong from address, so if I'm trying to send an email from straightupcraft.com, but I'm sending it from a user at barrelstrengthdesign.com, I might get this error, SMT connect failed, because the connection info that I've given Craft is being rejected because it thinks it's the wrong, it thinks somebody's trying to spoof something.
And do they give you any sort of like logging to that effect, or like?
No, it's one of those that I've just come to know because somebody's asking me the question, and I'm like, I've struggled with this one before.
Mm.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when I get here to this point and I go, okay, I've got the entry in the log and it's not sending. I suspect that what's wrong for you for this time is you added that X on the end of your server. But if it's not sending through Craft and I want to eliminate the problem there, what I would want to do is I would want to find some way of trying to make an end run around, Craft and the plugins and all of that, and just sort of send it raw, straight, plain. So what's a tool to do that with, to send an SMTP email, set it up so I say, okay, I'm going to use this host and this port and this blah, 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 and I'm just going to do it from a command line or some basic tool or something like that so that I can,
Well, you could always do it from, it might be heavy-handed, but you could always do it from like a separate email client too, just to test your credentials. Like if you had, Thunderbird or Outlook Express or whatever installed, set up a new account, put in the same credentials that you put into Craft just to kind of rule things out.
I ended up writing a tiny little single throwaway PHP program that just shoved that stuff in there and made the call. So Thunderbird or something like that would be another way to do it.
I haven't found myself trying to do that too much, Mary, and I tend, not saying that that's not a decent option, as much as what I'll tend to do is try a different environment. So if I'm on local, try dev or something and see if something like that might change it, or just go to a site that I know emails are working on and kind of hijack it or hijack a local site where I know emails are working and try to replicate whatever I might be doing there. So I'll kind of just try to change environmental variables to see if I can narrow down what the issue might be.
Okay, so there's no really sort of curl of email sending.
What would that be testing? Because it wouldn't be testing Craft, right? You're
Right.
just testing the connection info.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, I guess the problem with doing it from a PHP script is like if you're using PHP's mail function, then that's tied to the underlying PHP mail library installed. And so if that's broken in Craft, that's also going to be broken in your script as well.
Right. Right. No, it wasn't a terribly great option. It was just the one I stumbled into.
Yeah, I don't know of. I mean, there might be like a little simple app, like Windows app or Mac app or something, just for like quick one-off testing like that.
Yeah.
But I think I don't know. I've got a mail client. I use Postbox, and so I think I just set up a quick account in that and test it maybe.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Does anybody else have any common errors they've run into here that feel should be mentioned? I think the main one that I've run into, I mentioned there, is that in these settings, your from address does matter in some environments. So it's not always the easiest to see a specific error about. So one thing to check when you are doing it, make sure you didn't misspell your domain and your from address, or make sure that it's the domain that is authenticated with the service that you're using to send the email.
Sometimes the username would be just the username and not the fully qualified email address.
Yeah, that one's pretty
That's
common too.
a pain, yeah.
Yeah, and it's different per host, like per environment.
And then some hosts, you have to actually check the mail before you can send the mail. I've run into that too, but not with the mandrel type stuff we're talking about.
Got it.
I feel like it's always a good idea to get used to a certain sending service and just get used to the patterns that, to set up a new site and to work with it. And I don't know, the more familiar you are with it, the more things you can rule out when you're troubleshooting.
They generally all do the same thing. It's a preference of UI more than anything. Maybe if you're really dealing with heavy volume or programmatic stuff, they're plenty different in what one you might choose. But as far as what you're connecting Craft to send transactional emails, it's probably not a big
yeah, it's probably worth mentioning on those transactional email providers. Like one way to hook them up in Craft is like most of them have these legacy SMTP options, and that's what most people would put into Craft's SMTP settings, like you've got smtp.mailgun. But I think all of them would generally prefer that you go through their API instead. And so in that case, you would have to have a mandrel Craft plugin, which I'm pretty sure there's one, maybe a couple. But then you have an API key that you generate on their website that you plug into the Craft plugin, and then that way you're kind of just bypassing all of the legacy SMTP stuff and just going straight through their web service APIs.
Where does the Craft email setting? Where do you override the Craft email settings for that? You're just ignoring them, or you're hijacking?
Yeah, I think you would just. I think the plugin just ignores them in that case. I'm sure it probably reads system email address, but the protocol and that stuff would just all be ignored.
And would the I think config settings like test2 email address might have to be implemented by the plugin at that point?
Yeah. So in Craft 3, I believe it's already possible, even in the dev preview that's been out there, for a plugin to completely hijack what Craft.email uses. And I think we even wrote a sample mandrel plugin for Craft 3 that shows it. So everywhere in the control panel and everywhere on the front end would all start using whatever the plugin says to use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's up on your GitHub account, or I believe I saw something like that.
Yeah. And so we did that for email, and I think we kind of had the same plans to do it for search. So if you wanted Algolia just throughout the control panel on the front end, it would just all get swapped out with that.
Cool. All right. So are there any other considerations we have when troubleshooting email in Craft? If people would like, I wanted to share what we've been doing with Sprout Email real quick. We created a sent email element type. So we're talking about these services like Mailgun or SendGrid or whatever, one of the benefits of using them over PHP Mail is you start to get to see a history of the email that you've sent and what happened to it, and you learn more about the deliverability and what happened. So just an example of what plugins can do internally to Craft, we're in Sprout Email kind of watching anything that gets sent through the standard Craft protocol. I'm sure we'd have to rethink that if people are doing it through an API or something. But any email that gets sent by Craft, we're capturing, and then we're kind of storing what was actually sent, so you can refer to what the user might have seen, or see if it. We can't watch things like deliverability because they're leaving the CMS, so we need to call back to the CMS to communicate something like that. So this is more of an indication of if it was sent from the CMS. But then we can do things like allow you to resend an email or resend an email to an updated recipient or something like that, or take a closer look at all the settings that were used when an outgoing email was sent in the case that some of that information is helpful to troubleshoot something.
Nice.
So just some ideas on, I'll be excited in Craft 3 where people can start using email APIs more flexibly. That sounds very interesting. All right then, well, I think emails are now simple.
I am behind Coding Horror's definition of email, 100%. So.
All right. Well, yeah. Without why don't we? It sounds like we're kind of wrapping it up there. So, any final words?
Will email ever die?
No, it'll be around with cockroaches.
The funny thing is, email is actually kind of a generational thing in a way. Like I know a lot of younger people, they may have like a Gmail address, but that's not how they want you to contact them.
They just use it to activate their accounts, is all.
Yeah.
I saw one study of somebody who took the Sears catalog from like 1920 and went through it and was able to find every single item sold in it somewhere in the world today. So it will be interesting to see how. I think technology has a much faster history. You can kind of see the birth and death of a industry in the period of a few months sometimes in technology where.
Well, VCRs are out now, right? So I used to use Mandrill, and it was great, and it was simple, and it worked. And then Mandrill started charging, and I stopped using Mandrill, and I haven't, so I've been sort of bouncing around between one transactional email provider and another, and I haven't really settled on one, and I don't know whether anybody feels comfortable about recommending or disrecommending them. And then the other thing is that I'm just trying to get up my nerve to setting those DKIM and SPF things, and I haven't yet done that, but I can see that.
It's not hard.
That's a DNS edit. It's not hard.
Yeah, depending on the transactional. So I think if you're going for free, Mailgun has a free option, SparkPost has a free option, and Amazon SES has a free option, but Andrew, I'm not sure it's free for everybody if you're not using some other Amazon products.
I've heard people say that, but I've got a number of clients that are using Amazon SES, and they are using no other Amazon services at all. So
Postmark app too.
Yeah, I've even looked at their pricing very recently, and it does mention that. Not to say that if I just did it, maybe it would work or something, but
maybe it's something. It's been a few months since I've set anyone up with a new Amazon SES sender. It's literally been 2 months, but
yeah, not too long then.
The existing customers, I've got a whole bunch of clients that are using it, and they're not being charged anything. And maybe they're grandfathered in, and they changed it for new signups. I don't know, but I've got a ton of clients that are using Amazon SES, and they're not paying a dime. So okay. I don't know.
Well, something to look into. Yeah.
SendGrid is also good, and they don't store message bodies. So if that's something that's important to a client, or you want a transactional service, but they don't store the actual body of the message, then it's beneficial for confidentiality and stuff.
Yeah.
But SendGrid also is free for, low volume.
I guess Ben, you kind of asked people to summarize stuff. I guess the biggest takeaway that I would mention from this is that if you're having problems sending email, it's probably not Craft. It's probably not Sprout email. It's very likely some kind of config, and we've given you some tools in terms of how to sort that out. You know.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap it up then and say thank you for coming out, everybody. Thanks for your wisdom and your experiences. Straight Up Crafts, a weekly event presented by Barrel Strength Design and Pixel and Tonic. We'll be back with the next topic. Have a great day.
Thank you.